Good afternoon. I am Pierluigi Sacco. I am a senior advisor at OECD, and today we have the pleasure to have with us Thierry Baert, who is the senior advisor at the Metropolitan Lille Urban Development Planning Agency. And with Thierry, we will have an opportunity to review one of the most important cases of culture-led local development in the last decades in Europe, the case of Lille, that is today positioned as one of the most vibrant and innovative cities, and I should say also regions at the European scale, and one of the really interesting examples of how cultural planning can make the difference over the long term. So Thierry, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And I would start by asking you to present us the Lille case, giving us a few words about that, and then telling us about how the Lille case study developed over the years. Thierry, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Pierluigi. Thank you for the invitation first, and then for the good things you said about Lille. I'm not totally sure it is worth being said that way, but I will let you decide and. After my short presentation of the story, the travel through times with culture in Lille during the last decades. So the idea is to tell you a few words about what is the Lille area, where is it. To show how it was and it is still a true industrial city, a kind of paragon of industrial city, at least for France, and the direct effects of deindustrialization and the role of culture in the revitalization, the regeneration of the whole area, with the year 2004, when Lille was European City of Culture, as catalyst for these regeneration process that is mainly, but not only, based on the reuse of the heritage and the capacity to raise creativity and self-esteem among the inhabitants of the area. So if I start with the Lille position in Europe, you see that Lille, I don't know if you see the arrow, but Lille is there in the middle of a triangle, London, Paris, Brussels, much closer to Brussels than to Paris and London, and on the border between France and Belgium. Lille is also part of a large conurbation that is starting a few kilometers south of Lille, and that is covering most of Belgium, the Netherlands, and so on. So there is a kind of urban continuum, and we are in some terms more belonging to these lowlands conurbation than to France, at least in the form of urbanization of the area and to some cultural patterns, whereas obviously we are politically French, and also we're speaking French in the area. If we have a zoom effect, you can see how the border between France and Belgium is crossing the urban fabric. Lille, in fact, has three, would say, major specific features compared with other large French conurbation. The first one is this cross-border position. That is not only a border position, but really a cross-border position. The second factor is the fact it was born from several historic cores. It's not the development of one core, Lille, but the merging with time between several historic cores. And that is due to the third specific characteristic, the industrial past. We could say that together with a few other French cities like Saint-Étienne or Mulhouse, we are really a production of the industrial era, and not a city that grew up with the industrial era, like Lyon, for example. In fact, Lille discovered a few years ago that it was not only lost in the far north of France, but was in fact very, very close to the core of Europe, and that is thanks to the high-speed train connections that suddenly put Lille on the map as a city 30 minutes from Brussels, 1 hour and 20 minutes from London, and 1 hour from Paris, making it a kind of could have made it a suburbs of one of the cities, as travel time to work in Paris, Brussels, or London is often of these the same time that the time by high speed train from Lille. And the idea was not obviously to become a suburb of those big capitals, but to redevelop the city as a kind of hub in between those different cities. Two major aspects raised the profile of Lille at European level. The first one is the huge redevelopment due to the new station that is Lille, designed by the now famous, but at that time very well-known architect called Haas, that made a very innovative design for the redevelopment of a new center point for Europe in the core of the Lille area, and that is still under development 30 years after, obviously. And the second event, or second fact that made Lille on the map is the fact it was European City of Culture in 2004, and these obviously on this aspect that I will focus this afternoon. If we have a through look into history, it is worth recalling that Lille is not only this industrial city I mentioned, but it's a very old city, a very old Flemish city, very close to Ghent, to Bruges, to Brussels, and so on, with an history that is quite similar to those Flemish cities, with a tradition of trade and industry, especially textile industry, from the Middle Ages and not only from the Industrial Revolution. It is also a border city, probably the city with the biggest number of sieges in France, 11 sieges through the history, the last ones being the one during the Second World War as well, but First World War that destroyed a part of the center of the city, as you can see. But if you go back to the history, there are very famous siege in 1792 during the French Revolution and so on. So a border city and a city that suffered a lot from the wars and other rivalries between major nations in Europe. The prosperity of the area was mainly made on textile, linen and wool first, and then cotton and artificial more recently. It was already an important spinning and weaving area at the end of the Middle Ages, at the time of the Burgundy state, as we say. The Industrial Revolution came quite early for the continent. It started at the very beginning of the 19th century with industrial artifacts that were in fact stolen in England and that started within the urban fabric with all the former noblemen's mansions that were turned into factories. We see here, for example, an example from you see the wall moved because of the machines. But very, very quick, it was clear that within the walled city, it was impossible to develop the large factory that we needed to respond to demand. And in the second phase of the Industrial Revolution, huge areas were covered with new factories, multi-story factories, as textile mills were developed at that time on a model very similar to the English models of that time, especially. The city grew around those factories without any order, any urban pattern at that time. In fact, in a few decades, what was at the origin several historic cores developed and finally merged, but merged quite late in the 20th century. And today there is just one metropolitan area, as we say, covering municipalities that are still independent formally, but gathered within a metropolitan authority that is more and more the place where major investment, major policy development are made. There are 90 different municipalities within this metropolitan government, and that is only obviously the French side of the border. With the Belgian municipalities, we have a lot of cooperation agreements and so on, but they are obviously not directly part of these metropolitan governments. That is a French authority. This development was also was also leading to a very big divide within the local society between a small class of business families that were more and more prosper, extremely rich and so on, and working forces that were very poor and suffered a lot from the working and living conditions. So the story of the late 19th century and the early 20th century in Lille is also a story of struggle between working class and business that were linked with the right-wing party and the Catholic Church, and working forces that were very much linked with the emerging Socialist Party, the trade unions, and municipalities that were very early conquered by the labor forces. This story of prosperity through textile lasted until the 50s and even 60s. You can see this photo that is dated back from the 60s, showing what was at that time the world's largest textile factory, La Linière, in Roubaix, the second largest municipality in the Lille area. But textile was dominant. There were a lot of other type of activities like steel industry there, where steam engines were built, but also steel bridges and so on, with Fivkai, that a company that is still existing but no longer in location. In the 50s, the area was still a world model, with an international exhibition, with factories that were visited by VIPs. You see Queen Elizabeth II and Nikita Khrushchev visiting factories in Lille at the turn of the 50s and 60s. But already in the mid 60s, the process of the industrialization started. There were a huge number of different companies working with textile, mainly in the area. Not all of them have disappeared now, but the peak of crisis was probably in the late 70s and the 80s. These led to social problems, obviously, to economic problems, but also problem of poverty, problem of dereliction of the urban fabric, problem also of difficulties to host more and more multicultural population and so on, things that are quite familiar for people who know what happened in the majority of industrial cities at that time, especially the linked with textile. But another problem that is often underestimated is the fact that it led to a chaotic and meaningless urban fabric. We have an urban fabric that was made by and for industry, and with the disparition of industry, we can hardly understand where the streets are going to. We have a lot of brownfields, even if some of them are green, they are still brownfields. We have a mix of housing, social housing, private housing, affordable housing, more bourgeois housing, facilities, and so on. And it's very, very difficult to manage the urban regeneration in such a chaos. You see, that led us also with a lot of redundant buildings. Some of them are very high quality industrial buildings, but also residential buildings. And fortunately, we decided not to demolish them, or at least not all of them, but finding new use for them and trying to let architects show their creativity through their reuse. That's just a small example of these. That started quite early with an example led by the public sector. It's a huge spinning factory that were turned into a kind of unité d'habitation, in fact, kind of a Corbusier vision of things, that is at the same time housing units, but also facilities for the residents and facilities for also the area around. as early as 1975. At the same time, more or less, a few years later, the private sector started to find some interest in those factories to turn them into offices. That's another example, very close from the previous one, only 200 meters one from each other. But also some first examples of luxury loft apartments in the 80s. But the main use found for those factories were cultural facilities. For example, this huge factory in the very center of Roubaix that was turned by national government into a center for archives from the working world, that is, was said, and that is a national government facility. Another interesting cultural facility is the Frénois School of Visual Arts. This time is not really an industrial building that was turned, but an old popular leisure center with cinema, dancing, skating rink, and so on. That's for workers spending their Sundays, Saturday night and Sunday morning, as we know. It was turned into what is sometimes called as the digital Villa Médicis. That is a very high-level school of visual art. There are only 48 students for 2 years, and it's a very huge competition for getting this possibility to work there, to study there, sorry, and work, in fact. And most of the students now are coming from Far East, China, Korea, and Japan. But also a reuse of more modest buildings, or more modest use, with a number of university buildings also redeveloped within those factories. One of the major attractors also for the area is the museum that were redeveloped within Art Deco swimming pool in Roubaix at the end of the 90s. And these led to the year 2004, when Lille was the European City of Culture. All what I mentioned so far is to show that it was not just a coup, but something that were in the momentum that was started 20 years before, in the idea that we could turn this post-industrial city into a major cultural center. And I will show you some of the 2004 achievements. The idea of reusing the industrial buildings was very important for 2004, with especially for example, what we called Maison Folie, that were places for creation and social life within the more derelict, the more deprived areas of the not only the municipality of Lille, but the whole Lille metropole. These in the district Moulins, very close to the two first examples I show you of refurbishment of old fabrics, of old mills. But also in Roubaix, a huge facility for the textile industry, not a factory, but a public facility for conditioning the raw material of textile that was turned into something that is very similar to a Maison Folie, but to a site that is not only for the district, but for the whole area and even the region. It is in fact a kind of cultural factory. Another example of those Maison Folie that is in another district was M, where you can see some interesting exhibition took place within the places where textile machines used to be, with this red brick system of little voting. Another example, more linked with economy, but always with culture, is the idea that we should not only make refurbish buildings, put in them cultural activities, but rather to put them at the center of a more integrated redevelopment scheme for large area. That is another deprived area of Lille, Bois Blanc, where this Ura technology was developed within another textile factory, and this is now a very huge cluster for digital economy, one of the largest probably in France outside Paris. Another important redevelopment made of various factories or industrial buildings, with also an objective of refurbishment of the whole area, is taking place in Roubaix and Tourcoing, just at the limit with the two municipalities, and it is linked with image, video games, and so on, and mixing this time research, culture, economic development, and also social areas. So a kind of integrated cultural, as they did, kind of German term of culture, that is a kind of new place for the new civilization of the digital age. But this also, more anecdotic perhaps, is also developed with gardens and parks, with these example of gardens made of the various cultures, and this time cultures in a term of multicultural things, as it was devoted to the various community that came from all over the world to redevelop the area. So there is an African garden and Vietnamese garden, and but also an English garden, and so on. From Lille 2004, there is also another huge redevelopment that is mixing cultural facilities, social facilities, and economic development facilities. That's very close to the city center of Lille, in a former goods station that was turned into an integrated redevelopment. In fact, and it is mixed with events. The idea with these events were to be federative and bringing together all kind of types of people of the different origin, of different cultural background, with the idea of promoting equality for all, not having just street events of poor quality, but street events with a high level of creativity.
Thierry, excuse me if I interrupt you, but this is really an impressive, it's an impressive example of massive reconversion of a post-industrial city. But what has been the relative role of the private and versus public stakeholders? Who took the initiative here, and how this remarkable investment was carried out?
It's really clearly, well, it's difficult to give you a single and definitive answer. At the origin, it was mainly the public sector that took the lead. But slowly but surely, the private sector came into the game. With different kinds of private sector. For example, the idea of fashion quarter is made of a private sector fashion designers, not necessarily high-level fashion, but just people that wanted to develop their own trademark in textile design. You see, for the wedding costumes and so on. But the idea was mainly to bring the whole population in the process, and through this whole population also the private sector leaders. I'm coming in a minute in these aspects of the private sector. I move on. Some images of what happened, and for the first example of those what you were mentioning, because of those story of European City of Culture, we saw François Pinault. You know, I guess François Pinault, one of the richest man in France, that who is a collector of contemporary art, one of the biggest in France. He had decided, he changed his mind in the meantime, but he had decided to move his collection to Venice, with 2 places in Venice. I won't describe the situation in Venice, but before going to Venice, his collection, he decided to the French public, and he did it not in Paris, but in Lille. That is, I think, that was in 2008. That was also, you see, a way of bringing into our redevelopment strategy the private sector actors. The refurbishment of one of those housing from the richest textile factory was also the opportunity to get some investment from the private sector as a mecenate initiatives. I moved on the Louvre Lens, and these already presented, I think. I don't know if you're interested in figures about 2004. It's quite old now. I don't know if it's very relevant, but for the participation, we had 9 million participants in the year. Just to give you an example, the events, we 600 and 700,000 people in the street of Lille. That was absolutely not forecast. We were expecting 200,000, and in fact, people came in a very huge number that, in fact, prevented to develop the real pro. To be honest, because of safety reasons, but there were real popular, what do you call it, popular momentum around the event. So for the financing, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Is it possible that this massive, it really caused a sensation in Europe, the level of participation in Lille 2004? Do you think that this was related also to the long-term legacy of the cultural strategy? Because in some sense, the Lille case is also a real textbook case in the power of cultural strategy development. So what has been the main lessons learned from this point of view in terms of how a cultural strategy systematically deployed can change the future of a metropolitan area or of a region?
Well, it's very difficult to give a very definitive answer. What is sure is that this cultural education, this cultural appetite from people is a big part of the success. The second thing is probably that we prepared very carefully the program with a lot of local associations, and as you saw in the previous slide, we had 17,000 ambassadors within the community. So 17,000 people committed themselves to help make the program known, to help people to go to the various events and so on. So that's also a lesson. And the third one is also the fact it is a very young city. There are the metropolitan area is roughly, on the French side, is roughly 1.2 million inhabitants, and we have 115,000 students from the higher education. I don't count people under 18. So people between 18 and 25. That is in universities and high schools. So altogether, it's a part of the explanation. The other part of the explanation is the relatively high involvement of the private sector. It's out of the roughly 74 million euro of the funding, 13 million were coming directly from the private sector. That sounds to be not that high, but if you compare with other examples from at that time, at least, that is the largest mecenate operation made in Europe, and in a country, France, where it was not really a tradition. We are in a country where culture is funded mainly by the public sector, firstly by the national government, but also the local authorities. And a part of also interesting is to see that because of those investments made in facilities before and so on, the expenditure was mainly devoted in event, exhibitions, etc. One of the largest proportion compared with other European city of culture, also at that period. And Lille 2004 is still alive in a sense, with what we call Lille 3000, with a kind of legacy in terms of cultural program that is happening every 3 to 4 years. Last season was just before the pandemic crisis, and the next one will take place in principle at the end of next year.
If we Thierry, if we compare the pre-2004 Lille with what Lille is today and the role that culture has in city life and in civil society, what would you think would be the main differences and also the main legacies in terms of how culture made a difference for the story of and the future possibly also of the metropolitan area?
I would say that there are several aspects of the legacy. The first one is the one showed on the slide. That is, it was not an event only located in Lille or the Lille area, but the whole region were involved in a lot of other municipalities, and that's helped a lot to develop cooperation with the surrounding areas. That's one very important legacy. That's not directly linked with culture, but to some extent with the event and the way we manage it. The second important legacy is the fact that we managed to brought together this very year what could call the four blades of the helix: the cultural sector, the social sector, the public sector, and the private sector. And because of this year, they started to talk together and to consider culture as an important element of the development strategy, also for the business. So we started to break down the silo thinking of business is business and culture is something different. Business, culture, creativity, digital development are things that are not exactly the same, but they are fields that are covered at jointly by those different elements. And so this led to the fact last year we were World Design Capital, and this time in the World Design Capital, the private sector played an important role, perhaps a role more important than the public sector. Is that helping for your?
Absolutely. No, that's very impressive. And also, as you said, I mean, in France, there is not a huge tradition of private financing of a cultural initiative. And the fact that there was this gradual takeover from the private sector really meant that the private sector understood how culture could become a driver for development of the area. And by the way, also some of the legacy probably spilled over at the national level. Clearly, Lille was a case study for social cohesion through the Maison Folie model. And now the Microfolie, for example, model that is being developed in France at the national level. Can it be considered a spin-off in some sense of the experience of Lille?
Mm-hmm. No, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But we also developed a more cultural private sector also. We moved towards a more cultural attitude of the private sector, also a more entrepreneurial vision of the cultural sector and so on. So there is also a kind of not really merging, that would be not true, but and a kind of transmission of values between those different words. And something played a very important role in this is what we call Comité Grand Lille, the Greater Lille Committee. The Greater Lille Committee was created in the 90s by a couple of leaders from major companies, together with people very close to the political power. And In fact, I will tell you a secret. The idea of bidding for European City of Culture didn't come up in the public sector, but in these circles, in the private sector, in dialogue between the public and private sector, with our agency being as a kind of hub. No, hub is not the right term, but a kind of catalyst, facilitators between of the dialogue between the public and the private sector. And these committee, 300 to 400 decision makers meeting every 2 months, every second month, sorry, to promote projects, to discover together the different policy, the different initiatives taken by not only the public and the private sector, but also the academic sector, the culture sector, and so on, is helping bringing together the various dimensions of the local society.
But thank you, Thierry. I think that this really showed us what a exceptional example of the power of strategic thinking and planning this has been for the local development of the territory. I don't think it was overstated to say that this kind of model is really a case study which should deserve attention from all European regions that are interested today in culture-driven development. So thank you very much for this impressive presentation, and congratulations for the exceptional work carried out.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You're always welcome. And obviously, I was already very long, but not long enough to show you the various aspects of this strategy, the various aspects of Lille 2004. And so you're welcome to come and see, physically speaking now, not only by video conference, the reality of these cultural achievements in Lille.
I've been there personally several times, and I can testify that it's really an impressive and worthwhile trip.